Yes, I read an obituary in 1996 that in the New York Times that talked about Zwick and his death and his life. And that led me to a professor of sociology at the University of Connecticut who was writing a book about them. That led me back to the families and the descendants who had videotape and memoirs of their parents. And that led us then to this other survivors who also had their own stories. I'd read a great deal about this period, and I did not know this story. I was surprised that I didn't know the story, and I assumed that if I didn't know the story, having done what I had done in research, that most people wouldn't as well, and I felt it's a story that needed to be told to the world. They do. They were very, very moved. I think many of the people felt they'd never adequately been able to explain to their children or to their children's children what they had lived through. And I think once they saw the film, they understood now that their stories would then be known forever within their families and within larger communities. And they were very touched and they were particularly grateful. Yes, I've had the opportunity now to show the movie to many people who were there. And some of them were very emotional. Some of them found it difficult, but most of them were actually very joyous about it. They remembered these men. Most of them now who are still alive were younger. They were 12 and 14 and 16. They were children, and yet they had this image of these brothers and what it felt like to see them. And I think it meant a lot to them to see them again. Well, the events are true. The conversations, one could never know. So those were all invented. But I think people tend to look at the big picture rather than the specifics. And their memories of what it felt like in the woods and what the Zimlankas were like and what the food and the cold and the rivers and the swamps, I think they always they felt that that was the thing that was so particularly in their memory. Defiance, the title, is not just the urge to fight back, but it's the refusal to have your life taken away from you. And their communities had always been important. And the idea that they were able to recreate that community in these circumstances was their triumph. And I think to give a sense of that community was very central to my intentions in the movie. I think that's why we invent movie characters and have superheroes, because it's easy. Most people and most heroes are not simple and not perfect. And I wanted to say that sometimes heroic things are done by people whose nature and whose behavior is not necessarily always heroic. From everything I had read, I wanted to carry forth both sides. I think the character of Tuvia, he commits murders in the beginning, and even at the end, he's killed someone from his own group. I think that kind of that moral complication was very important to me to keep throughout the movie. We discussed it a lot. I think that's what interested the actors as much as anything else. I think Daniel was as interested in playing a morally complex character as he was playing an out-and-out hero. I think he'd already played an out-and-out hero in James Bond, and I think that was less interesting to him. Long before Daniel was James Bond, he was a great, great movie actor doing very interesting character parts. That's what he had done mostly his life, and I knew that that's something he would do particularly well for this. Yeah, I think when the whole cast and crew are there, shivering day after day for 12 hours in the forest, they tend to become their own community. And an ensemble of a film company is not unlike a forest community. Different relationships are developed. There's a kind of humor, there's a kind of camaraderie, and there's a kind of intimacy. And I think we tried to put that on the film. Well, we actually built the set in the same way that they did. There were trees that were, there that we were allowed to cut down. There were holes to be dug. We built those bunkers. We did it just the way that they did because we wanted it to be authentic. It was very cold and very wet. I mean, the Baltic is particularly wet. It's a low-lying country. The swamps, the rivers are very moist, and so the cold is that very distinctive wet cold, and it just cuts right through you. But then again, the crew had Gore-Tex coats and down jackets. The cast was wearing period clothing, and they were very cold a lot of the time. And I think in some perverse way that helped. I think we're all capable of more than we realize. I think given particular circumstances, we can never imagine the resources that we have to call on. And seeing a movie like this might remind us and might ask us how we respond to adversity and how much more we have that could be found.